All right, let's dive in. When you think about a liver transplant, you probably picture the surgeon, right? The engineer carefully swapping out this incredibly vital piece of machinery. But here's the thing. There's another person in that room, the anesthesiologist, and they're not just an engineer. They're the pilot, flying the patient through an unbelievable physiological storm, a storm that can go from 0 to 100 in a split second. Today, we're going to climb into the cockpit with them and see what it really takes to navigate one of the most complex procedures there is.
And to really get a sense of the stakes here, let's just start with one number, 33%. That's about the odds that when the new liver is hooked up and blood flows into it for the first time, the patient's blood pressure will just completely crater. It's a life-threatening event called post-reperfusion syndrome. And this one moment, this single terrifying climax, is what that entire anesthesia team has been preparing for from the second the patient rolls into the room.
So here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start by looking at the patient's incredibly fragile starting point. Then we'll see how the team sets the stage for the surgery. After that, we'll go right into the surgical gauntlet itself, talk about the wild balancing act of blood clotting, and finally, we'll cover what happens in the critical moments right after.
Okay, so before anyone even thinks about making an incision, you have to understand who you're dealing with. This isn't a healthy person having a routine surgery. With end-stage liver disease, the body's entire central command, its main filter, its metabolic engine, has failed. And that failure sends shock waves of chaos through every single other organ system.
A perfect example is what happens to the cardiovascular system. These patients are in a state called hyperdynamic circulation. Basically, because their liver is so scarred, blood pressure in the portal veins skyrockets. This floods their bodies with things that make blood vessels relax, like nitric oxide. So what does the heart do? It goes into overdrive, pumping a massive amount of blood. That's the high cardiac output, but it's pumping into these wide-open, floppy vessels. The result is chronically low blood pressure. It's this bizarre, high-flow but low-pressure system that's constantly on the brink of collapse.
And this isn't just one system failing, it's a total domino effect. The heart itself gets weak from all that overwork. The lungs and the kidneys develop their own life-threatening issues. Toxins that the liver should be clearing out start to build up and affect the brain. And the blood's clotting system? Well, that becomes this huge paradox that we'll get into in a bit. The bottom line is, for the anesthesiologist, every single part of the patient's body is a potential landmine.
So with a patient that fragile, you can't just do a standard anesthetic. You have to build an entire high-tech command center right there around them. This is the setup phase, where the team puts in all the lifelines and surveillance tech they need to fly through that storm. Induction has to be lightning fast to make sure they don't aspirate. Then comes access. We're talking massive IV lines, huge ones, because you have to be ready to give back blood and fluids at an incredible rate. They have an arterial line in so they can see the blood pressure change with every single heartbeat. There's a rapid infuser on standby that can pump in more than half a liter of blood a minute. And often they'll use a TEE probe, which is basically a live ultrasound of the heart, giving them a constant, real-time picture of how it's functioning. All right, the command center is built. Now the surgical gauntlet begins. And from the pilot's seat, this isn't just one long surgery. No, it's 3 totally distinct acts. And each one comes with its own unique set of dangers.
You've got the pre-inhepatic, the anhepatic, and the neohepatic stages. In simple terms, that's the part before the old liver is disconnected, the period where there's no liver in the body at all, and then the moment the new liver finally gets hooked up. Let's walk through them.
First up, the pre-hepatic stage. This is all about dissection. The surgeons are working in a minefield of swollen, high-pressure veins caused by that portal hypertension we talked about. This part can be incredibly bloody. At the same time, liters and liters of abdominal fluid, or ascites, are being drained, which can cause massive fluid shifts. The anesthesia team is in a constant firefight, aggressively replacing blood and fluids, managing clotting, and just trying to keep the whole system stable. And then the clamps go on. The major vessels are clamped off, and the diseased liver is removed. Welcome to the anhepatic stage. In this moment, the amount of blood returning to the heart can suddenly drop by half. The patient is now officially without a liver. That means no drug metabolism, no production of clotting factors, nothing. The body's chemistry starts to go haywire,
acid builds up, and the anesthesia team has to manage this complete physiological void, sometimes even using a special bypass machine to help support the circulation.
And that leads us to the main event, the real climax of the whole surgery, the start of the neohepatic stage. The new liver is sewn in, and the surgeon gets ready to take the clamps off. This is it. As this quote puts it so well, the first 5 minutes after that new liver sees blood flow are defined by the risk of total cardiovascular collapse. Think about it. The second those clamps come off, the patient's entire system is hit with this wave of cold, acidic, potassium-filled fluid that was used to keep the donor liver alive. The result? Blood pressure can plummet. That huge potassium load can trigger deadly heart rhythms. So the team isn't just reacting here. Oh no, they are way ahead of the game. They proactively treat with calcium to protect the heart, bicarbonate to handle the acid, and they have powerful blood pressure drugs locked, loaded, and ready to fire. Now, through all 3 of those stages, the team is juggling this constant paradox. You'd think these patients are just massive bleeding risks, but the truth about their clotting system is way more complicated. It's a non-stop, high-wire balancing act between bleeding to death and forming a deadly clot. This table really shows what we call rebalanced hemostasis. So yeah, the failing liver isn't making the factors that help you clot. But here's the kicker. It's also not making the proteins that prevent you from clotting. So it's like both sides of a scale have been lightened at the same time. The system is technically in balance, but it is unbelievably fragile. The slightest push from surgical stress or a big transfusion can send it tipping violently one way into a massive bleed or the other way into a dangerous clot. And that's exactly why the old-school lab tests like a PT/INR just don't cut it. They only show you one side of that scale, the pro-clotting side. So they tell a very incomplete story. Instead, a modern liver transplant relies on tests like thromboelastography, or TEG. It gives you a real-time, complete movie of how a clot is forming and breaking down, which allows the team to be incredibly precise, giving only what's needed, whether it's platelets, or fibrinogen, or something else entirely. So, the new liver is in, the patient is stable, and the surgery is ending. But the storm isn't over, not by a long shot. The pilot's job continues as the team transitions to an intense vigil, watching for complications in those first critical hours and days. In those first few hours and days, the biggest fear is that the new liver just won't work. It's called primary nonfunction. Or that a tiny but critical artery feeding the new liver will clot off, which would be catastrophic. Bleeding is still a huge concern. Then, as you move into the first week, the focus shifts to watching for infection and the first signs of the body trying to reject the new organ. But what the team is really looking for are the good signs, the signs that the new liver is waking up and getting to work. As it starts to function, it chews through the preservatives in the blood products so the patient needs less calcium. It starts clearing acid out of the blood. The kidneys start getting better blood flow so urine output picks up. The patient's body temperature starts to rise. And the most satisfying sign of all, you see the new liver starting to do its main job, making that classic golden green bile. These are the signals that the pilot is landing the plane. You know, when you break it all down, managing a liver transplant is just a masterclass in physiology, a minute-by-minute tightrope walk that the anesthesia team navigates with incredible skill. And because of them, patients who are sicker and more complex than ever are getting this life-saving surgery. Which leaves us with one final thought. As medicine keeps pushing the boundaries, what is the next frontier? What new tech, new drugs, and new strategies will they develop to pilot even sicker patients safely back to shore?